And I know that that's really helpful to our repair vendor to know quickly what's wrong with it so that they're not spending an extra 30 seconds to 60 seconds turning an instrument over trying to find something when someone's already got that bit of information and they put it on a tag. So, tagging the instrument and what specifically is wrong with it can be really helpful.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
All right, Sterile Processing Universe, welcome back to another episode of the Beyond Clean podcast. This is season 29, Planet Assembly. I'm your host, Bobby Parker, and today's episode is titled, Don't Fear the Repair, Empowering SPD Assembly to Act Early. I hope we made the Blue Oyster Cult proud with that topic. We are looking at instrument repair bins and particularly how to use them well. There are a lot of cases where sterile processing technicians may be uncomfortable with the concept of pulling an instrument out of use and putting it in that repair bin. You don't know maybe when you're going to get it back. You don't know if you have another instrument to replace it. And let me tell you, just as important as inspecting instruments to make sure they're clean is inspecting them to make sure that they're functional. And so we're going to dive into that topic today. Joining us for the episode is a sterile processing leader with a decade of experience, primarily in this instrument coordinator type role, where we're thinking specifically about how do we get technicians to flag instruments, put them in the repair bin? How do we pick a good repair vendor to make those repairs and keep our instruments in a high degree of quality? If this is something that you're either struggling with or new to, I hope this episode will be enlightening to you to make sure that technicians in your department don't fear that repair bin. We'll be right back after a short break.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
And joining us now in studio is Joseph Martin, Sterile Processing Manager at UCHealth out in Colorado. Joseph, good to have you back in the studio again. Good to almost see you face to face. How you been?
I've been doing well. Thanks, Bobby. I appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for the Beyond Clean OGs out there who have been listening for quite a while, you may remember Joseph's voice and name from prior episodes and webinars that he's done with us. But what you might not know is Joseph started in the same health system that I did here in Louisville, Kentucky. And so a longtime friend of Beyond Clean and has quite a bit of expertise around the topic that we're going to be covering today. But before I let that cat out of the bag, Joseph, why don't you give our listeners a little thumbnail of your sterile processing career, what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, well, I am approaching my 10-year anniversary in sterile processing, so I'm pretty excited to hit that milestone. But around 10 years ago, I started as a technician in Louisville, Kentucky, worked as a technician for a little while and moved into a data analyst position where I helped with count sheets and things like that. Then stepped into an instrument coordinator position where I was an instrument coordinator in Louisville, Kentucky, helping with instrument repair needs and trying to make our inventory as complete as possible. And then around 5 or 6 years ago, I stepped into an educator role out here in Colorado and was an educator for about 3 years again, and then stepped into the manager role 2 years ago. So I really like that sterile processing has a lot of career ladder movements that you can make that really benefit yourself and your family, and that can really offer you something that a lot of other industries can be kind of hard to move up into. I think that's just something that's unique about SPD.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And as a former sterile processing manager, often made that sales pitch for people looking to get into healthcare, were maybe interested in a foot in the door. And I said, well, this isn't the foot in the door kind of place where you come and learn something for 6 months and then get to the department you really want to be in. But if you're looking for upward mobility, for an opportunity to grow your career in a department that outside of a certification doesn't have a lot of obstacles in the way to get started, sterile processing is a tremendous place to do that. And with all the different types of roles that you've worked in over the last 10 years, Joseph, I'm sure that your story is a great example of that very thing. One of the reasons, Joseph, that I wanted to talk with you on this episode, we've been working through this season about instrument assembly, called it Planet Assembly, and just introducing people to the concepts of the various different important aspects of the prep and pack area. And I wanted, as we wrap up this closing episode of the season, to touch on something that's vitally important to instrument health, and that is the instrument repair side of caring for and inspecting instruments. And thinking back to your early days in sterile processing, even within maybe a year of getting started, instrument repair, instrument quality, instrument data has just been part of your story. And I know it's something that you're passionate about and care a lot about. So as we get started in the conversation here, why don't you help us think about how it is that instrument repair is fundamentally important for technicians that are working in that assembly area? What do these two topics have to do with one another?
Well, as far as instrument repair, it's not really that the repair itself helps the technician in the moment, but it's really a means for the technician to remove damaged, dangerous, non-functional instruments that could harm a patient, moving them out of that stream of reprocessing and getting them on the track to getting repaired. So as far as when you have an instrument set in front of you and you're working through making sure everything's clean, making sure everything's safe and functional, and you find an instrument that's damaged, you need a means of taking care of that. And an instrument repair bin and an instrument repair process is there to help you remove it from that tray so that it doesn't reach the patient, so that it doesn't reach the hands of the healthcare providers. You really want a smooth process for that.
Sure. Yeah. And we've talked a good bit on this season about instrument inspection with respect to contamination, making sure the instruments are clean. But to your point, a damaged micro scissor can cause just as much grief in a surgeon's day as a contaminated one, and potentially just as much damage to a patient, particularly if the one thing they need to proceed with the case is not working the way that it should. And then that was the only one that was in the facility. And you can imagine the types of things that instrument repair runs into. I'm curious, have you ever experienced kind of the ugly side of instrument repair as well? Like when it works well, it's keeping the instruments functional, it's keeping our surgeons happy. But when surgical instrument repair, either because we're not finding the repaired instruments or because the repair maybe wasn't up to the appropriate standard, how that has caused some problems for a department or for the OR?
Yeah, I think one recent example is really that a particular kind of occluding clamp wasn't doing that. It wasn't occluding properly because it didn't have enough force to really clamp down and block what they needed to block. Other examples that are kind of like scary are when you have damaged inserts on, forceps. There's some ads and forceps out there that have tungsten carbide inserts, and those inserts tend to crack a little bit more than some of the other tungsten carbide inserts just because of how they're used and their shape. But if you don't catch that particular damaged tungsten carbide insert where there's a crack in it, it can work its way loose in use in the hands of the surgeon when they've got it inside the patient. That's happened once to me before, where the instrument had one of the inserts break off while in surgery, and that's really scary. But it's things like that you can catch as a technician on the clean side that really prevent harm to the patient. That's just one simple but scary example.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess what we're there's a lot of angles that we could go to talk about this topic, but we've got a limited amount of time. Certainly, it would be fun to dive into your experience as an instrument coordinator and talk about, how to pick out a good repair vendor, what happens on the van, and what the process looks like from getting the instruments from the repair bin to the van, inspecting them, getting back into the workflow. And so maybe that's a conversation for another day. But because we're being laser focused on assembly, I really want to focus on kind of the technician's experience with repaired instruments. And that primarily has to do with that inspection piece you talked about, the classic example of the tungsten carbide inserts that can chip and be cracked, and the need to inspect those under lighted magnification and have them be pulled for repair. So I guess the primary way that the technician interacts with instrument repair is just the repair bin in the department, right? We're going to pull these instruments, get a functioning backup to put in the tray and get them into the repair bin for somebody to take off into the truck. Now, when I've been in departments that have been asking for an assessment or some help from Beyond Clean, one of the things that I look for when just kind of inspecting their instrument inspection and assembly process is how full is that repair bin? Because a completely empty repair bin with dust bunnies in the bottom of it is a telltale sign that we've got a problem in assembly. Have you ever run into that same kind of maybe cultural pull of people being hesitant to pull instruments and put them in the repair bin?
Sometimes, honestly, I think my instrument coordinators are struggling with too much in the repair bin because someone's being sneaky and they don't want to put this in the backup wall, but they're going to pretend that it's damaged, and so they'll put it in the instrument repair bin instead. That's a little bit more common problem that I'm working through at the moment. But if there's any kind of motivation that I could offer to a technician to use that repair bin, I've found a lot of success through just simple education about what can our repair vendor repair. I've noticed that if you have an in-service with your repair vendor and they come in and talk about X, Y, Z capabilities, you're probably going to discover in the next few days something that they spoke about specifically is starting to show up in the repair bin. And two easy examples I can think of are strangely mallets, like heavy ortho mallets, and lids for containers. I remember that our repair vendor came in, did a PowerPoint presentation, talked about, hey, these are the instruments that we can repair, and here's some examples of damaged instruments, and here's some examples of what they look like after we're done with them. I passed around a big old ortho mallet, and it looked shiny and new and wonderful. And, lo and behold, the next day when I get back to work as an instrument coordinator and I look in the instrument repair bin, I have a handful, a bouquet of ortho mallets that I realize, I'll bet it's because of that education yesterday that our staff received that, I'm getting a bunch of ortho mallets in because they didn't know. They get a sense of satisfaction of, I can help with this instrument and make it look better by just putting it in the repair bin. The other is instrument container lids, where you have your repair vendor who repairs those containers come in, talk about specific issues with lids, about latches and edges and seams, seals and gaskets and springs and whatnot. And staff the next day, what do we have? We have a massive pile of lids that staff suddenly realize, this is in need of repair. So as far as motivating staff to put it in a repair bin, if you've got a dusty repair bin, have some in-service, have some education about what your repair vendor can do and specific examples of how they can make something broken functional again.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Joseph. It reminds me of conversations around law enforcement, I guess. The data that appears to unfold whenever you increase law enforcement in a particular area, you would think that it would play out that crime in the area would go down, more law enforcement, less crime, but the data almost always shows the opposite. It's not that more crime happens, it's just more crime is being caught, right? So you got to be careful whenever you roll out this new instrument repair education in your department or instrument inspection, because your repair budget's probably going to go up. But that's a good thing. That's what we want to be spending those dollars on. We want to be caring for those instruments, and we want our surgeons to be saying that this is a place where the facility cares about patients and the instruments are safe for use, and not the kind of place where they say it's kind of the garbage bin of instruments and, you're lucky to get one that's going to function. And so education is really important. I also wonder if for departments that struggle to use the repair bin, if technicians are dealing with competing priorities. I know in departments that just perennially run behind 300 trays in the morning, and the only narrative, the banner over that assembly area is, we've got to get these trays through. And so there is no lighted magnification inspection of tungsten carbide inserts happening because they just don't feel at liberty to be able to do that kind of inspection. Or maybe the limiting factor rather than time is a budget. Maybe it's a rural facility and, that's the only one of those instruments they've got. So if they pull it out of the tray, we don't have a backup and we can't leave the tray down. And so we just make a decision to have a subpar instrument and hope nothing goes bad. And that's not a strategy that we want to be employing. So I guess figure out whether it's an education issue, a time issue, an availability issue that would keep your technicians from using the repair bin and start working in that direction. Because we do want craftsmen, excellent inspectors in our assembly areas, not only looking to make sure that things are clean, like we talked about in the borescope episode, but also that the thing is not damaged, that the tips of scissors actually meet up, that they've not been sharpened so many times that the scissor doesn't cut all the way to the tip anymore, and things like that. Well, off the soapbox about using the repair bin, we want to use it. Let's talk a little bit about the logistics of that repair bin process. Does it matter to you, based on your experience of being an instrument coordinator, managing instrument coordinators, kind of how that instrument repair process flows? Are you a fan of tagging instruments? What kind of bin do you like to use? How should all of that work together?
Yeah, well, while I was an instrument coordinator, I really liked having a regular metal basket for an instrument repair bin, because that would allow me to give that particular metal basket with the instruments that needed repaired to the vendor. They'd take them, repair them, put them back into the basket, and then when they brought it back, staff and decontain would just wash it, clean it, and send it through in that particular basket, and then that same basket would come out onto the clean side and I could pick it up. At the time, I didn't always want or ask staff to try and put a note on an instrument about what was damaged. It's always helpful when they put that there, but I didn't really stress it when I was the instrument coordinator. I'm a manager now, and I am super lucky that I have 2 instrument coordinators in my department, and both of them have really tried to work with the staff and the technicians to put notes on instruments, whether it comes from a particular set, if there's something specific that's damaged on it. When I walk by our instrument repair bin, I see damaged instruments with tons of tags on them. And I know that that's really helpful to our repair vendor to know quickly what's wrong with it, so that they're not spending an extra 30 seconds to 60 seconds turning an instrument over trying to find something when someone's already got that bit of information and they put it on a tag. So, tagging the instrument and what specifically is wrong with it can be really helpful.
Sure. I want to follow up with you about the metal basket concept, because it's different from other repair bins that I've seen. And I remember when we implemented that metal basket for the repair bin for that reason. Just to answer questions for people who might be thinking through, how did you keep that basket from getting mixed up with the other one whenever you were putting it through the washer, that people didn't think these are all damaged instruments and then throw a couple of more damaged instruments on top of the good ones, and now you don't know which ones have been repaired? Like, how did you keep all of that straight?
We did that with special tags. Well, they're not really special, but they're tags. Tags that said what was inside the tray. So I would put down on the side, put back onto the backup wall so that when it came out onto the other side, it had a tag on the outside that said, put away on the backup wall. So staff would know, this is not a bin of random instruments for a clinic or, leftovers from, a whole shift's worth of extra instruments. These instruments are clean, safe, ready to go onto the backup wall. That's how we typically would work on it. And I would be able to remove that tag from the side of the basket pretty easily and move it to a different basket if I needed it to. But the tag was really helpful in that process.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be an important piece of it. The other thing about the logistics portion that I remember that you implemented was separating out, or I don't remember if it was you or the guy before, but separating out the general repair instruments and then a delicate bin for, micro scissors so that we weren't putting the bouquet of ortho mallets atop some, micro bayonet scissors and making a bad situation worse. Have you carried that forward for repair bins? Do you think that's valuable in separating those things out?
It is really valuable. And that was something that John Rowe implemented before I became the instrument coordinator that I found really helpful. Yeah, exactly like what you said. You don't want a pile of heavy instruments on top of those delicate instruments getting more damage than what they already are. It's helpful.
Sure. All right. So that's a little bit about the logistics of the repair bin in assembly. Then we want to use it. We want to make sure that it's accessible, that it's in a spot that makes sense, not like across the department, where they've got to walk a half mile, around the corner in somebody's office to put it in there, but somewhere that's easy to use, accessible, that it's sensible. If we're doing tags that we're only asking the reasonable amount of questions on there, and it's easy to attach, not just an 8.5 sheet of paper and a stack of rubber bands or something like that. Making it as easy as we can for it to be used can certainly help. There are more considerations about this repair bin, though. SPD has a big burden of responsibility for identifying instruments that need to be safe for patient use, but they're not the only hands and the only eyes on these instruments. In your mind, Joseph, what role should the OR play in this instrument repair process, and how can they partner to make sure that the instruments stay in good condition?
You should try to involve your OR as much as you possibly can, because they have a lot of great feedback as to how the instruments are actually performing in use. Are your curettes and osteotomes dull? Are your scissors dull? Are your scissors, were they accidentally over sharpened and they're not actually closing at the tip like they should be? They have a lot of really great feedback as far as how your instrument repair vendor is performing, or how they might need to increase a particular preventative maintenance program. If you're getting that set up, you really should try to involve the OR on how frequently should you be sending a set out for preventative maintenance. Should it be every 15 uses, 10, 20, 25, 35 uses? Getting their input on how frequently we should be sending something out is important. When I would pull instruments for preventative maintenance, a mistake that is always memorable is when you pull something for preventative maintenance and it ends up that you send it out to the offsite facility, the truck, the van. They're repairing it at 9:30 in the morning. Well, you get a phone call saying, "Hey, where is Dr. Sievertson's ear set?" And you're like, "Well, I sent it out for preventative maintenance." And then you are already quickly thinking, "I'm getting this phone call because this set is needed for a patient." And you learn very, very keenly that you need to involve the OR in the sets that you're going to give your repair vendor. So in the morning, you need to pull stuff that, might show up on your report, but you got to run it by the OR to get their buy-in that this is something that we can spare, that it's not needed for a patient or not needed as a backup. This is something that we can spare for an afternoon or a day and actually send it out to get looked at. You got to get their feedback on that.
Yeah, for sure. And Joseph, when you said Dr. Sievertson's ear set, I just put my hand over my mouth and chills went down down my spine. Everybody's got one of those surgeons to deal with. But yeah, I remember that strained relationship as we continually tried to get those micro instruments correct. And yeah, that's not a phone call that you want to get for sure. We haven't talked much about preventive maintenance, and we're not going to be able to dive into it because we're already running short on time. But it does get at the fact that having a strategy for instrument repair is important. Like we want to have data behind what we're deciding to do. So you mentioned measuring the number of uses between PMs. I think that's a great direction to move if you've got a tracking system, to move from a time-based system. We send it out, 4 times a year to, we're going to send it out based on how many scans it came through the department. That's certainly one piece of data that's really important to instrument repair. I'm curious from the technician's perspective, though, with the repair bin in particular, is there any data that you think that we should be tracking for that instrument repair bin?
Yeah, there's probably lots of different things that you could be tracking and a lot of different things that you could get from all that data. I think it's really helpful to just start tracking something and use that data to the best of its ability. Tracking the number of instruments that you do send out for repair through that instrument repair bin can be really helpful to highlight how good and how skilled your technicians are. If you can say, we're regularly sending out 10 to 30 instruments daily to get repaired, that's something that you can really highlight to the OR by saying, we're catching 10 to 30 instruments before they reach you and the patient. I think that's an important thing to highlight.
Yeah, you could use that even to celebrate technicians. We talk about error rates, and certainly, technicians boast in their efficiency, who's the fastest at putting trays together. Like, yeah, I'd like to have an Eagle Eye award of like which technician this last year flagged the most instruments to go out for repair. Like, I think that would be a really good thing culturally for a department. I don't know, maybe not if they're putting the instruments in there, just because they don't want to put it on the backup wall, but you get what I'm saying. Like that would be a great thing culturally for the department to pull that data. The other piece of data that's important to instrument repair that your repair vendor should be doing for you is giving you a summary report of what was repaired. And so whenever you get all those instruments back in, particularly the repair bin, or even for those instruments going out for PMs, they'll give you a rundown of which instruments were repaired, maybe even some photos of before and afters for some of those instruments. And I'm not exactly sure how this would look from a data tracking perspective, but it is important to read those and be aware of what kinds of damage you're seeing in your facility. If you've got the same instrument that keeps getting damaged over and over and over again, you're going to know about it if you read those reports well. And that might be an indication to you that something needs to fix about your care and handling of that one instrument. I know that we've got plenty of examples from our days here in Louisville of where those repair reports ended up causing us to change the type of holders that we put instruments in to try to fix that, but certainly really important. Joseph, we are about out of time here, but I want to give you the final word. If you were to give advice to a leader out there who maybe is not as lucky to have 2 instrument coordinators in his department and is really struggling to get their arms around instrument repair, the state of their instruments today is pretty poor, as the surgeons would complain about it. Where should they start in fixing their damaged instrument problem?
That's a really good question. I would just stress to meet with your repair vendor regularly. And, if it's daily, if it's every other day, quick meetings that are super focused about what kinds of things are showing up can be really helpful. It also builds that relationship with your repair vendor that you can work together to actually repair the instruments and not just find damaged instruments. Meeting regularly with your repair vendors is a really good start. And trying to have them come in to partner to do education and in-services would be the second thing. Is if you've gone 3 months and you haven't had your repair vendor come in to do an in-service, you should do that. I think those 2 things are really helpful. And if there's one fun thing that I would recommend, it's trying to get your technicians to go out and see the instrument repair process on the van, the trailer, the repair room, if you've got an on-site facility. If you can have your technicians tour that area, I think it's really fun and helpful in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it's transformative. And what technician wouldn't want the opportunity to get a pass out of Decontam for a little while to go spend some time on the repair truck? That's a dream. Again, we could talk about what's on a repair truck and what that's like, but it also is a bit eye-opening, both the types of skills and tools that are used. You picture it being a lot higher tech than what it is. They've got some grinders and some microscopes and some Dremel tools out there, and they're just, going after it, but they're, very practiced and skilled at being able to do that with a high degree of precision. But I just remember being really surprised by what the truck looked like, but also, seeing some of those capabilities, you're going to retain more than just a 60-minute CE with a PowerPoint whenever you can see them actually perform that repair in front of you. Really great advice. Joseph, I've got a lot more questions that I'd love to talk about instrument repair, but hopefully this has been helpful for our listeners that are maybe new to sterile processing, learning assembly, and maybe some leaders out there that are trying to get their arms around this instrument repair piece. Really great conversation. If anybody's got further questions for you about how you've managed instrument repair, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I think LinkedIn would probably be the best way. I'm on there pretty regularly.
That's almost always the best way on Beyond Clean. So thanks for being regularly active on LinkedIn, Joseph. And
sure.
Again, great episode. Good talking with you as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bobby.
All right, that was Joseph Martin, Sterile Processing Manager at UCHealth in Colorado, sharing with us a little bit about that instrument repair bin in your department. I tell you, if you're working in assembly today and you either don't know where the repair bin is, or one of those pain points that we highlighted for you of either we're too busy, or there's not enough backup inventory, or we just don't really know what the standards are for what's acceptable and not acceptable for instruments, I hope that this episode will be what it takes to get you moving in the right direction and trying to address that obstacle and really start utilizing that repair bin well. If you're listening to this episode and kind of rolling your eyes saying, man, it would be nice to have a repair vendor, ours only comes once a month, I would encourage you to try to get together with your SPD leader, get together with the OR, and have a real conversation about what the state of the instruments are really, and leverage some of that help from your surgeons, from your infection preventionists, your risk team, to get with administration and take a look at that budget and figure out what do we really need to be doing with instrument repair to make sure that our run-of-the-mill stainless steel instruments are safe, that we're not going to have these events of damaged needle holders having tungsten carbide chip off into patients and things like that, or having scissors delivered to the OR damaged, or having trays missing instruments because we had to sterilize it without that instrument because it's being held in the repair bin for 3 weeks, waiting for the next time the repair truck is going to come along. I hope that it would encourage you to take those steps. If you don't have an instrument coordinator out there and you think this episode has been a good start into considering one, I also want to call out back in season 23, the roles that make us great. We had an episode dedicated entirely to instrument coordinators. Why don't you go give that one a listen and hear a little bit about what goes into that role, what the justification might look like for having one of those roles, because let me tell you, it makes a big difference whenever you can have somebody devoted to making sure that instruments are being repaired appropriately, that there's one person in charge of purchasing instruments and trying to align up what vendor we're going to be using. That can also help a lot with your instrument tracking system. Sometimes those roles go hand in hand, like in Joseph's story of being a data specialist and an instrument coordinator. So give that a listen. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's episode. And also that's going to do it for Planet Assembly. I hope that this season has been helpful, whether you're a brand new technician learning instrument assembly or this is kind of your bread and butter. I hope that we've kept you interested along the way. We're going to take a little bit of a break. We'll still be with you each week here on Beyond Clean, either with a new series or with a series of reruns. And then our next season that'll be kicking off after that short break, we'll be moving on to the next stage of the sterile processing workflow into sterilization and storage. I look forward to talking to you again then. Until next time, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.